Hello, good morning, everyone. It is June 28th, and we are about to get our morning conference call started. So, based off of popular demand and some requests from our agents, we will be doing a training or just a kind of an informational video about T-47s and title commitment. So, there's a lot of confusion going around with the T-47. When do I need it? What is it? What do I do with it? Will it be done at closing? When do I need to get it in? Blah, 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 right? So really a T-47 highlight, and I'll go into it a lot more, is just basically an affidavit basically stating and swearing that the seller, by all purposes of what I understand, is no changes have been made to the property, therefore relating to an existing survey. So I'm going to pull one up here, and we're going to go down the list, and we are going to just kind of go over it, and just kind of like we did with the appraisal process last time. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to go into this here. So at the end of the day, when do we need a T-47? We need a T-47 when there is currently an existing survey that we are trying to pass into title and get lender and title approval for that old survey that the previous owner may have had, right? So whenever we look at the 1 to 4 family contract, so let me look at my blank docs here, and I'm going to pull up a 1 to 4 family contract. So the time that we need a T-47 is when we select paragraph 6, right? So we go to paragraph 6, which is title policy and survey, and the section C where it goes over survey. The only time we will need a T-47 is if we hit block 1, right? This basically states that within an X amount of days after the effective date, the seller shall furnish the buyer or title company's seller's existing survey of the property and a residential real property affidavit promulgated by the department, which is the T-47, right? We don't see any mentions of a T-47 in number 2 or number 3 because these are requesting a new survey to be provided basically by the buyer or by the seller. So anytime a new survey has to be drawn up, a T-47 is no longer needed. The only time we need a T-47 is if we hit 6C number 1, which is that the seller is to furnish a new survey, right? And if the seller does not provide it in that amount of time, then the buyer can then pay for it, or I mean, I'm sorry, the buyer can order it at the seller's expense, or if the title company deems that we need a new one, we dictate who's paying for it, right? But that's another thing that we can talk about while we're in this section is if we did select 6C1 and we said, hey, the seller needs to provide it within 5 days. If the seller doesn't provide it in 5 days, based on this highlighted and boldened lettering, it basically says that the buyer can order one at the seller's expense. So regardless if it was good or bad, or if it had the buyers to pay for it later, if the seller doesn't furnish it to you within this amount of days, you as the buyer's agent have the right to order that new survey at the seller's expense. And it says it right here. So even if it's not a valid one, or if whatever the case may be, if the seller doesn't give it to you in the time frame, you get a free survey for your buyer. And that's something I would really try to fight for. Timings are very, very sensitive in these contracts, and if one doesn't abide by them, and for your sellers as well, if you don't provide it from your seller, that buyer's agent can then force your seller to pay for a new survey, even if they selected at the buyer's expense. So that's something to really keep in mind, guys. So back to our T-47, why we need it. And so because they are giving out an existing survey, we then go through here. And what it is, it's an affidavit just basically swearing that the seller has not made any changes that would reflect on the old survey, therefore needing a new survey, right? So the first part is really, where is this property? Here's the address. In what state? Texas. And basically going down the lines is we are the property owners, or anybody who is entitled, who is the beneficiary, who is the executor of the will of the property, of whatever the case may be, in selling the property. And then we are familiar with the property and the improvements located on the property. We are closing a transaction requiring title insurance, and the proposed insured owner lender has requested the boundary coverage of the title policy has been issued in this transaction, right? Basically going over what property we're talking about. And then number 4 basically states that it is to the best of our actual knowledge and belief that since this date of, when they bought the house or when they erected a new shed or when they did something, that we have not done any construction projects such as new structures, additional buildings, room, garages, swimming pools, or other permanent improvements or fixtures. B, changes in location of boundary fences or boundary walls. So if they put in a new fence, or if they change the outline of the fence, then that would need to be on there. Any construction projects that immediately adjoining properties which encroach on the project. So if they had a shed that's kind of in between two lots or whatever the case may be, just anything to do that would potentially change a survey. So if a new surveyor came out and they're like, okay, well now there's a new permanent pool there, or there's a new concrete slab, then that would be reason to need a new survey. And if we get a new survey, then we no longer need a T-47 because the new survey will show all of the new improvements and things that have been done. A T-47 basically is a guarantee or a sworn in statement from the seller stating that we haven't changed anything from our previous survey. So that's pretty much all it is. I would make sure that the timing is done and right, done by the time. So within X amount of days, if you're going to provide an existing survey, just provide that whenever you provide the survey, also provide a T-47. It's not the worst thing in the world if you don't get it to them. A lot of the times title will get them signed at closing if one wasn't provided and they use an existing survey. However, it is always recommended because at that point there is a potential default nature to that verbiage, right? If you don't get this in, then there's either a timing period or an additional thing that makes this contract, makes one party or the other in default, right? So we always want to try anytime you provide the survey, provide a T-47, and that just saves your butt. But a lot of the times also, and a lot of people don't really, enforce it, or unless they're really trying to back out of the deal, then that's the only reason why somebody would really try to implement that. Hey, we didn't receive it, we want to back out, and blah 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 blah. Right, guys? So really, send these two at the same time if you really want to keep things in order. However, probably 98% of the time, it's really not a huge issue, and it gets signed at closing. But try to be the above and beyond agent for your sellers, because you never want to have that one opportunity, that one chance that buyer is just looking for any reason to get out of the deal or any reason to try and do something to our sellers. So we just want to make sure we're on top of that. Let's see. Okay, and then that's really much it for the T-47s. They're super straightforward. If we have an existing survey, we need a T-47. If we get a new survey, we don't need a T-47. So bottom line, that's a good rule of thumb. Secondly, is we wanted to talk about title commitments. What is a title commitment, right? So a title commitment basically states that us as the insurer, or us as any title company, Capital Title, First American, Old Republic, whatever the case may be, they're all title companies, and they provide a thing called title insurance. So what title insurance is basically that this is your bundle of rights to own your home. You get the quiet enjoyment, you get the fee simple nature, you get to use and do your property what you want, minus any HOA stuff, right? So let's say I own all this, and Joe Schmo from 2 generations ago or 2 owners ago said, hey man, my house, that house belonged to my great grandfather, and he had a will, he left it in his will, or he left something and that was supposed to go to me. Instead, my aunt sold it off, and now it's in over here. So really what title commitment will do, and the title insurance will say, hey, Mr. New Owner, this previous person is stating that he has ownership into this title or into the property, and he's going to try and go to court or do all these things to try and reclaim the property. What title insurance will do is they will actually go and fight on behalf and say, well, no, nothing in our records, nothing was stated, nothing in that was filed in the courts show that there was any will, or there was any inherent or inheritance, and no, like, your claims are invalid, and we did the right thing, and the current owner who is living in the property is the true owner. So they go off in behalf and fight for any and all discrepancies in the chain of title, right? So that's what this thing goes over. It goes over the chain of title and who owned it before you and who owns it after, and it just keeps going and going, and making sure that everybody who is listed in that chain of title has been made aware or is aware and is in this process, and nobody can then come and try and take your property from you, basically claiming that it was an inheritance or that they had equitable title to it or they had a right. And so the main things we look at whenever a title company sends it to us, right? They always say, hey, thank you guys for using so and so title company. Here's a copy of the executed contract, as well as a title commitment and title policy, blah, 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 blah. Right. So the first three schedules are the main things, right? Schedule A is pretty much just the parties to the transaction. So this is one from before that I used, one of my current deals. So the proposed insured is going to be the new owner. The title policy amount is for the price of the home. This is again, this is for the second borrower, third borrower. There's no other borrowers. This is a cash deal, so they don't have any loan policy, no short-term residential loan policies, nothing in an interim construction loan. So those are going to be blank. The interest of the land conveyed commits fee simple, and fee simple, guys, is the highest and best form of ownership that you can possibly have. Think of your real estate classes back in the day. What is fee simple, right? The fee simple is the bundle of rights that you have to enjoy your home and all the rights that it possesses for you. And it goes over the seller. So the seller is Tyson Properties LLC. And then it goes over the legal description, right? So Schedule A is always about just what the property is and the parties to the property that are involved. Schedule B is any exemptions from coverage, right? So, okay, so we as the title company are gonna protect you from all of this, but we're not gonna protect you from this stuff. And if you want protection from this stuff, then we will add an additional rider to get extra fees and extra coverage for you. It's like regular car insurance, right? If I want renter's insurance, I got to throw it an extra coverage on there. It doesn't normally come with it, but if I want it, I'll throw it on there. And then we can get some of these exemptions that typically aren't covered. And it's always good to look through Schedule B as well. I know a lot of companies and a lot of trainings will always say, just look at the Schedule C, because C stands for closing, right? We only want to get to closing. Everybody's concerned about closing, but we also want to make sure we're protecting our clients, guys. And so by looking over what this coverage doesn't exempt, that's also going to be a big thing later on down the line, because let's say something does happen and now the policy that we thought was going to go and fight for us is like, oh, okay, well, based on section 4A, it doesn't cover any tidelands or compromising shorebeds or anything, which is pretty typical because it's natural resources, right? So if you do live on a riverbank or on an ocean and the water just keeps going up and up, there's really not much you can do, right? That's natural causes, it's natural forces. I can't go and take the river to court. So it's like we can't insure from that happening if it does happen, right? So certain things like that. Standby fees, taxes, assessments of authority. Basically, these are any back taxes or delinquent taxes. They can't insure from that because it was the responsibility of the owner. They didn't pay their taxes. It didn't get done, and so they can't go and fight on the chain of title when somebody wants to come and foreclose on you for those taxes, right? It's just that's not something that they can cover. Terms and conditions, creating interest in the land, materials furnished or labeled performed. So basically any liens that you may have had or any loans you may have taken out, they can't go and fight because it was you as the owner who went and did those things. Exemptions from coverage in Schedule B, title, separation exemptions through. So just other little things, but majority of this is going to be standard on majority of all title policies, but look through them constantly. Every time you do a deal, look through them and see if you do see anything different, because that's going to be something that's noted and it might be an issue later on down the line. all lease grants, so they won't fight for any leases that were currently or previously on there. The rights of the parties' possessions, rights of tenants and tenants under the contract. So tenants, if you had it, um, that basically stipulates into a whole nother law. So like, let's say you bought a house that currently had a tenant in there, and then they're basically not claiming to leave or something like that. The title company doesn't get involved with that because that's not part of the chain of title. It's the fact that they might have equitable title because they've rented the place and they've lived there, but it has nothing to do with the actual ownership and truthing. So you have to go to, the regular courts and fight that on your own behalf. Um, Anything built over the 30-foot setback. So every house has its own boundary lines, right? We're building setback lines where you can and can't build. So this is basically saying that anything over the 30-foot building setback line or under, and then anything under or over the 16-foot easement, they won't either, right? They're only going to be ensuring what's inside the boundaries of the survey and of the building and the property lines. They're not going to be doing anything outside or over, right? And if we need to, we can always get a variance or an additional rider for coverage. Let's say you have setback lines and you're maybe a corner of your house is like a foot or 2 feet over that setback line. You can get an additional rider to put on that extra coverage. Otherwise, title just won't insure that little like 1 foot, 2 foot lip, right? Which isn't a huge deal, but at the end of the day, if you want the best protection for your service for the house, let's just get an additional rider. And I think it's not much at all for something like that as well. Okay, and the fun stuff is Schedule C, what everybody always talks about. This is the one that gets us to closing. We look at C for closing, and this is what all needs to get done to get to the closing table, right? We have to create the documents to the title or interest that it has to be approved and signed and notarized for the file. The satisfactory evidence must be provided that one, no person occupying the land claims any interest in the land against the persons named in paragraph 3 of Schedule A. So basically stating that there's no claims or there's nobody currently trying to fight for ownership while we're now trying to pass on ownership, right? So they have to verify that. They have to make sure all fees and taxes have all been paid. Any improvements and repairs have been completed. There is a legal right to access the land, right? It's not landlocked. And if it was landlocked, then easements have to be created before we can then pass on these new ownerships. Any defects or liens in other matter. Basically, again, if you have any contractors, vendors, liens, or any other loans out there that are attached to the property, we need to make sure we get those canceled out or paid, and then we can pass on the title, right? Get to closing. Appears to be clear voluntary liens. Company requires lien affidavit. So again, just making sure everything has been paid off before we move on to and grant everything to the next party. Company requires seller and borrower's executive affidavit of debts, liens, and third-party interests. So again, just verifying there's nobody else trying to claim ownership or money from the current owner for the current house before moving it on to the next person. So when you're a buyer, this is always good for you. We're making sure that the mortgage is getting paid off, the liens are getting paid off, the contractor that fixed the garage door 2 years ago has been paid off, right? So they're looking through all these things, making sure that if anything was filed with the county clerk, any sorts of liens or issues, that they are going to be paid off. And so that's what all of these are going down. So when looking through these, look for those items. Okay, look, this is the mortgage lien. Oh, I see that they also own back taxes of this. We need to make sure that those get paid for before we move forward, right? Or that title is aware and they have the lien payoffs and everything. And then that's pretty much it. Schedule D is really not a whole lot of information for us as the agents. It just, again, just goes over any mortgagers, any the title company's information, what they charge, and like their certain percentages of certain things. But it's really not anything for us, and it goes over the pricing for the title policy, because every single title policy or title insurance is the same coverage. It is the same price. So governed by the state of Texas, and after the Dodd-Frank Act back in like 2008, 2009, when we had this crazy bubble, they basically mandated that all title companies have to charge the same rate for title policies. It is based on a multiplier off of the purchase price of the home. So if you go to one title company and the cost for a title insurance is $1,500, you go to any other title company, that purchase price has to be also $1,500. So if you see one that's like, hey, well, I closed the house, 3 years ago, or not 3 years ago, but like, a month ago, 2 months ago, and the same price point, but the title policy was, $1,400. And now I'm closing another house that's exactly the same price point, but they want to charge me $1,900. Like that's not right. That's not correct because they legally can't do that. So if they're trying to do that, then that should raise a red flag and throw something in the mix, right? However, title companies can charge escrow fees. They can charge their own size of escrow fees. So that's definitely a question to ask if you're ever getting wined and dined or something by a local title company. Hey, what are your fees? And where can you give me a breakdown, right? Because that's what really is going to charge our sellers and our buyers on those fees, and that's the majority of why people choose title companies is because are we getting the best coverage for the best price? Are you guys charging us a whole lot of fees for that other title companies can't? And if you are, why? Is it because you guys give just so much better service? Then that might be a reason to charge a little bit more. But when you're some of these other title companies that it's just always a problem, always a headache to get a hold of somebody because they are really thin, they're a small company, and they just don't have enough closing officers or enough support staff, then it can get a little funny. And sometimes closings get delayed. And we've all been there where we have just a bad title company or a bad lender, and it's just hard to get a hold of anybody and get the deal actually done. So that's the majority of the reasons why you have probably a little bit higher and a little bit lower cost title companies is just because of the level of support. If you have a little bit higher of a cost for a title company, you're probably gonna have more employees, more people to talk to. It's just probably an easier process for the most part. But if you're going with a low budget, low cost title company, you get what you pay for. There's probably maybe 2 or 3 employees less that now have to share the same amount of work, and it just becomes a larger process. So don't always think cheaper is better. I mean, yes, we always want to get a deal and always want to save our clients money, but if it's worth the time and the hassle and potentially the error when you have so many files for one person versus an easier amount of files for one person on a bigger one, and even though they charge maybe $100 more, I'd probably rather charge the $100 more because it just means a smoother process, a more beneficial like thing for your seller because they're more protected. There's more people actually taking time and going through these files and making sure they're correct versus the cheaper, low budget ones that just like try to crank out as much as possible because they're just so overwhelmed all the time. So that's some food for thought. This is pretty much going over the T-47 and title commitments. If you guys have any other questions or need anything else, feel free to shoot me a text, give me a call. I'm always here for y'all. So if you'd like me to go into more depth on some of these issues, we can do this one-on-one. But other than that, I wish you guys a great rest of your day, and we will see you next time. Thank you.